Have you ever been to a car meet before and wondered why is there the same 6 cars here and where is the variety? And there's nothing wrong with those cars, but I sometimes come away from car meets wishing there were more unique builds. Now when I say unique, I don't mean a Pagani or a Rimac at your local 7-Eleven. I'm meaning common cars that get built to be uncommon. Cars that most people wouldn't even think to modify. So today, we've crafted a list of 5 of the best cars we would like to see more of in car culture. Let's begin. Alright, we made it through the intro.
That's a good intro.
Yeah. Our first car today is a car that is generally unknown to the public, but in the dark corners of Mazda car culture, this car still has a major following. I'm talking about the Mazdaspeed Protege from 2003. This car is a hidden gem amongst front-wheel drive turbo cars. It has an adapted Garrett T25 turbo, making 170 horsepower from a 2.0, pushing around 7 pounds of boost from the factory. The Mazdaspeed Protege has several other things separating it from its base model, including beefier suspension components, a limited slip differential, larger vented brakes, 17-inch alloy racing hard wheels, and a fresh body kit. This car is so sick and is probably one of my favorite Mazdas ever made. The only issues with finding a used Mazdaspeed Protege is the fact Mazda only made 2,000 of these cars in 2003, and the other issue is that most of them are completely rusted out now. However, if you have the technical skills, you can buy a Protege 5 wagon and swap in the turbo from the Mazdaspeed Protege, and you'll have a Mazdaspeed Protege wagon, which is pretty sick in my opinion. But that takes a lot of time and money, so you may have more success scouring the internet for a clean Mazdaspeed. Now, if you don't want the headache of searching for an uncommon vehicle, maybe this next car is for you. Second on our list today is very common, and most people see them daily without even realizing. The Volkswagen Beetle. I know, an odd choice, but hear me out. In their stock form, these cars are not the most beautiful cars to look at. In fact, they look like a bar of soap. Upright. That doesn't make any sense. The first gen is very bubbly and round, but the second generation improves in every way imaginable, improving on the retro feel with a hint of modern styling. In the first generation, also dubbed the new Beetle, you can get a couple of different engine choices, with the notable being 180 horsepower Turbo S, which had a 1.8 liter from 2002 to 2004. And the 2.5 liter with 150 horsepower from 2006 to 2010 that replaced some of the lesser base models. In 2012, a reimagined Beetle was released with a 2.5 5-cylinder, and this 5-cylinder is something you may have heard of before, the 07K. This engine is specifically important because it's half of the Lamborghini Gallardo V10 block, and it sounds great. Years later, they added a 1.8 liter turbo to replace the 5-cylinder and the 2.0 diesel. At the end of its run in 2019, the only engine option available was a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder making 174 horsepower. So these cars have so many options and trim levels to choose from, you pretty much can turn it into whatever you'd like. With a little modification and a good set of wheels, these cars can go from common traffic to something truly special, especially if you snag one with the 07K. And pair it with a nice exhaust. When I first added this car to the list, I didn't know much about them other than that they're a common commuter car. But after researching them, I began to understand the draw to these cars and their styling. Now, if you've seen the first Fast and Furious, you probably recognize some of the iconic cars. the Supra, the Charger, the Ford Lightning, and tons of other JDM and import cars. But this next car on the list is my favorite in the first movie, and it is very much so overshadowed by the legendary cars of the film. I am talking about the Nissan Maxima, specifically the 4th generation. Also known as the Maxima A32. In 1995, the 4th gen Maxima hit the States and introduced the VQ30DE 3-liter V6. This engine is the older sibling of the legendary VQ35, found in a lot of Nissans in the 2000s, including the 350Z and other cars of that time. The Maxima 3-liter spits out 190 horsepower and can be found with a manual transmission with certain trim levels. These cars are such a nice blend of style and performance and just ooze 90s style. The aftermarket for this car is vast, and there are a ton of forums and support for the VQ30. If you can get your hands on a still-in body kit and a good set of wheels, then this car will start turning heads very easily. If you're wanting to add more power, you can buy or fabricate a turbo kit, and if you're lucky, you may be able to find a pre-made supercharger kit. These cars may not be the fastest cars on the block, but they would certainly be a great addition at a car meet if done well. Over a decade after the last Maxima A32 was made, the Honda CR-Z arrived on the market. In 2011, Honda released the CR-Z, branded as the return of the CRX. The hybrid 1.5-liter pushing 125 horsepower is wrapped up in a sleek 2-door hatchback front-wheel drive package available in a 6-speed manual. This car is a real treat on windy roads due to its tight steering, but it fails terribly in a straight line, managing 60 miles per hour in 8.3 seconds. Honda had high hopes for this car, blending efficiency and sportiness, but when it was released, nobody noticed. This car fell by the wayside with the likes of the Civic, Fit, and Accord being similar in weight and mile per gallon, and having already been well-established names. In its debut year, it only sold 11,000 units in the US, and over the 6-year production run, it only sold 35,000 units. For reference, in 2011, the CR-Z only contributed to little over 1% of Honda's 1 million units sold in the States. In 2016, the CR-Z halted production because of poor production numbers and a lack of general interest. As much as these cars seem like a big flop, I find them very interesting. You get a nice commuter car that handles well, gets great mileage, has Honda reliability, and has a lot of potential. Turns out this car has quite a nice aftermarket. There's a couple supercharger kits that you can boost the power up to 200 horsepower. There's even a few kits that can handle 250 with upgraded internals, of course. As for the handling, it is already very tight stock, but there is still a variety of suspension upgrades that you can do. As for looks, you can pick up several body kits, including a very, very beautifully crafted one from Mugen. With a few modifications and maybe bump up the power a little bit, I think the CR-Z can be something very special in car culture. Winding back the clock to the 80s, this brings us to our last car today. The 1980s were some of the most influential for car culture, and the designs and innovations have left impressions for decades. This car in particular was very popular for its affordability and status. I am talking, of course, about the Porsche 944. This car deserves an entire video in and of itself because of how important it was for Porsche in the 70s and through the 80s, but we unfortunately don't have time for that right now. If we think of Porsche now, we think of powerful, polished, mid-engine or rear-engine sports cars, but this was not the case with the 944, and that's because the 944 is a front-engine, rear-wheel drive car, differing drastically from the usual mid-engine and rear-engine, rear-wheel drive formula Porsche is known for. A quick refresher, if you're not familiar, front engine is over top of the front wheels, and mid-engine is between the rear and the front wheels, usually closer to the back, and rear engine is over top of the rear of the car. So, back to the 944. This car hit American markets in 1983 and was an instant hit, Porsche made a sports car for the average man. At the time, a Porsche 911 SC was $15,000 more than the 944, roughly $42,000 more in today's money. This car was the answer for Porsche. People loved it. It had a 2.5-liter four-cylinder pushing 150 horsepower, which was way more than the average in the 80s. The 944 went through several upgrades and versions, but the biggest came in 1986 with the arrival of the 944 Turbo. Porsche just turned their affordable sports car into a masterpiece. They slapped a turbo on the 2.5-liter and pushed 217 horsepower out of the four-cylinder, which in today's standards is not that much. But back then, you were cooking. Porsche also added Brembo brakes, a sleek new body kit, better suspension, and a stronger transmission. After a legendary run, the 2.5-liter was replaced with a 2.7-liter, making 167 horsepower for the base model 944 in 1989. The 944 Turbo was upgraded to make 250 horsepower, and it was given coilovers, a stiffer chassis, bigger Brembo brakes, larger wheels, and a limited slip differential. This car was even more of a masterpiece with these upgrades. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. In 1991, the last 944 was released, and it was replaced by the Porsche 968 not long after. The 968 was built on the same platform as the 944 and ran until 1995. That was a lot to unpack about the 944, which is why we were probably going to do a dedicated 944 video in the future. The Porsche 944 is a very special car culturally. It helped push a lot of innovation over at Porsche and showed the world that they were ready for the 1980s and beyond. Nowadays, these cars can be easily overlooked, partially because most of them are trashed and rusted out. This car is almost 30 years old at its newest. That means 30 trips through summer and winter, depending on where you're from. So with that in mind, almost everything on this car is going to need replaced. However, they are still an underrated gem, and every time I see one on the street, it catches my attention. These cars really suck as a daily driver because of the old electronics and everything that's 30 years old. But to counter that point, they make great project cars. There's tons of aftermarket support for them, and there's even some really interesting engine swap kits. One of these kits includes a full swap for a certain 5-cylinder I mentioned earlier, the 07K. The 944 is such a nice blend of sport and style. With a little updating, a lot of updating, this car could be something way more special than I already feel it is. Throughout this video, we've talked about all types and ages of cars. They all had a couple things in common. They're uncommon to find in car meets, and usually can find them for under 10K. These 5 can all be pretty sweet cars to see on the road or at a meet with just a little modification. They all have something to bring to the table that's different from the others. The Mazda Speed is a nice turbo front-wheel drive car. The Beetle is equipped with a lovely 5-cylinder. With the Maxima, you get a powerful V6 sedan. The CRZ offers a good commuter and great handling. And lastly, the Porsche 944 gives you a timeless rear-wheel drive car. Whether or not you choose any of these cars listed, these 5 would always be a welcome sight on the streets or at a car meet. I've been your host, Hudson Cannon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. Follow us on Instagram at 40roll and follow me on Instagram at Hudson Cannon. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you on the next episode of The Hood Scoop. Looking like an absolute bozo. The Honda Mazda man. Anyways. However, if you have the technical skills, you can move the chair.